right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this video, we are going to take another look at modes, but we're going to look at it this way from a point of view that makes modes more intuitive for you when you start thinking about them. And as you start to put them together and really pulling them into your music, I think this video is going to really help clarify some of the questions that you have. And with that being said, what I want to point out is there's really three considerations to keep in mind when understanding music theory. Now, these are just three that I came up with on my own, kind of thinking about it over the week. And I think it's going to help a lot of folks out there with some clarity. And here's the gist. The first part is understanding the questions to ask, right? Music theory, it's new to a lot of us. So, right, if we're asking ourselves the wrong questions, then putting that onto our fretboard is becoming complicated, not because the fretboard's complicated, but just simply because the question really that we were asking ourselves didn't give us enough clarity to understand exactly what we were trying to put together. The next part of it is understanding the construction of whatever it is that you're putting together. The construction of a chord progression, the construction of a chord, the construction of a scale. And so far on this channel, this has definitely been the area that we've been hyper-focused in on. Now, the third part about it is taking all the knowledge that you've learned and some of your desired sounds and whatever it is that you want to get across with your music, your creativity, and putting that together in your own music, right? These, how do you put those together? What do you look at for getting that musical piece out in front of your audience? So these are the three kind of considerations that I look at when starting to really dive into learning music theory. And like I said, this channel so far has been very much focused on the construction of things, the construction of the modes, the constructions of the scales, the constructions of the chord progressions, things along those lines. And that's what this that's what this channel's going to continue to focus on. However, I'm throwing in new stuff to really help out everybody. Now, I put out a poll a while back. I'm going to put a link down in the description down below. If you haven't done so already, go take a look and respond to the poll, because it really gives me a good idea on understanding where I need to improve some of the content here. And I've got about a 20% right now of folks saying they don't really understand modes. And so that's really where this video is kind of coming in. Now, we're not going to focus in on putting the composition together, because in order to put in the composition, obviously we have to fully understand the construction. And since there may be a little bit of misunderstanding on how modes are constructed, what we're going to focus in on is make certain that we are actually asking ourselves the right questions so that we understand how modes really come into play for us. And that's what we're going to focus in on this lesson. Now, with that being said, as always, just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, hit that notification. Make certain that you're getting the latest of everything that I upload as soon as I upload it. And again, if you're getting something out of these, thumbs up, always a huge appreciation. So with that being said, back to our regularly scheduled program. What I'm doing here is I'm putting together kind of a grading scale on, how good is this particular question? Let's go ahead and just jump right in. A lot of us are asking ourselves, what is a mode? Like I've spoken on this channel plenty about constructing a mode, but do we know the answer to this question? And so therefore, asking yourself this question, what is a mode, is an A+ question to be asking yourself. You obviously you have to understand what a mode is before you really start putting them together. Now, here's the thing about a mode. And this definition is complete, but it may sound confusing. So let's break it down really quick, right? A mode is a composition variation. What is that, right? What? Well, in order for us to understand, a mode, we have to understand necessarily where it comes from, right? If you have if you have a Honda Civic, it's a variation, but you'd have to ask yourself, if I have a 2025 Honda Civic, What's it a variation from? Is it a variation from the 2024 model? Technically, it's a variation from the Model T, right? So where do we start with all these modes? It's a variation, but a variation from what? Well, we're talking about right now, these are the modes of the major scale. So they're variations on the major scale. That's all that it is. Don't read into it. Don't worry about all the other stuff right now. There's videos out there if you want to go look at the other videos for constructing all this stuff and deep dives. Knock yourself out, because that's what they're on this channel for. But right now, don't read into this. This is all that a mode is. It's just a variation. Really, it's a variation on the scale. That's it. Now, that variation incidentally gives us a mood, right? So a mode really is a mood. That's it. Now, the next question, what's the difference between a mode and a scale? Again, this is an A+ question to be asking yourself. And we kind of went over it already, right? The beauty of it is the modes are scales. They're just variations of them, right? So when we talk about the major scale, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, well, we might have a variation that's a whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. It's just a variation. That's it. And again, don't read into this. That's all that we are looking at so far. A mode is a variation on the scale that gives us a particular mood. That's it. And when I say mood, I mean dreamy or floaty or super sad or super weird or super happy. That's it. That's the mode, right? It's a variation on that scale, and that variation provides a given sound, a mood in our sound. That's it. Don't read into it. That's all that a mode is. Now, here's the next question. When do I use modes? Well, I don't consider this a great question. And the reason that I don't consider it a great question is because nobody can really answer it except for you. When do you use them? Well, understand that, Dorian might give you a dreamier sound. Are you putting a piece of music together that requires a dreamy sound? Then it'd be a great time to use it. But if you're not, nobody can come in and say, now is a great time to use Dorian, right? So when do you use modes? Well, you as the composer, you come up with that, right? It's important to understand the mood that a mode gives you, but when do you use it? That's up to you, right? 100%. The next question is, can I mix modes? And again, I don't consider this a hyper great question because of two different aspects. The simple answer is yeah, of course. You can mix modes all you want. There's no question about it. However, do you want to mix the mode? Nobody can answer that question for you, right? You may have a song that starts off, you bought a new puppy and it's really happy. And by the end of the song, it's 20 years later and the puppy's no longer with you, whatever, right? So, Ionian at the beginning and, maybe a Phrygian at the end. It kind of depends, right? So can you do it from a technical perspective? Absolutely. The great musicians do it. Lady Gaga does it a lot. Sting does it a bunch. But you're talking about some of the, best musicians on the planet. You're Lady Gaga, Prince, Sting, Tool, another, great band. Can you mix them? Yes. Should you? Maybe, maybe not, right? Nobody can tell you. So the next thing is you might be thinking, okay, well, if the modes are kind of a variation on a scale, what effect does that have on my music? And this is a very, very good question, because what you have to remember is that everything that we construct, everything comes from our scale. So therefore, if we have a variation in our scale, it means we're going to have variations in our chords, and it also means that we are going to have variations in our chord progressions. Okay, so a variation in the scale definitely has a cascading effect. And the reason, or what we're going to look at from this, is at the top you can see the major modes, at the bottom you can see the minor modes, and you can see the variations. Where do these variations come from? Whether or not they're major or minor chords, those variations come from the scales, and those scales, the variations, give us our modes, right? So the variations in the scales give us our modes, and this is kind of the effect, right? Whether or not we have a major or minor, you know, should we do a 1, 2, 3 or a 1, 4, 5 or whatever it is, this is where it all comes from. So what I want to do now is go ahead and dive into a little bit better understanding, hearing some of the scale comparisons and the mode comparisons themselves, and kind of evaluating the questions that we have as we go ahead and listen to some of the scales on the fretboard. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so let's take a really quick look and look at the comparison a lot of us make. What's the difference between C major and A minor? So let's take a look. C major, right? And then we come from our C major and we move back to our A. And so now, not only are we comparing C to A, we're comparing a major, and we're asking what the difference is on the minor. And that, yes, there's a relative minor here, but we're going to score that question on our scale about a C minus. All right, so we went ahead and we were listening to, C major versus the A minor, which I think oftentimes is where most guitarists kind of start comparing and getting confused, right? And if we look at this a little bit more clearly on the fretboard, this is our C major scale, right? And in the video, we were looking at that, right? We were asking ourselves, what's the difference between C major and A minor? And it is definitely a C minus kind of question. And we can kind of see it a little bit better here as we're looking at the fretboard. This is our, kind of typical C major pattern. And we immediately go, well, I'm going to move to A. Okay, well, we've moved our tonic. Not always great when we're doing a comparison. And then, not only did we move our tonic, but we are now comparing a major mode to a minor mode, and we're trying to learn modes, and this is our mindset, right? Hey, what's C major? What's the difference between C major and A minor? And moving tonics and comparing major and minors. You can do it, but it requires a much more fundamental understanding. So when you're first starting off, this is not a good question to really be asking yourself, right? So you get the idea. Now, with that being said, what I want to do now is move into our next kind of comparison of different modes and scales and kind of start to see what that actually sounds like. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at that, let's take a look at what a better question is to ask when it comes to comparing our C major to something a little bit more meaningful. So when we look at our C major, now, a better question is to say, what's the difference between our C major and our C minor? Now we have something a little bit better because we haven't moved anywhere, right? And so now we have C Ionian compared to C Aeolian. And it's a better question to ask when you're starting to learn the modes and trying to figure out something. So I'm gonna put this on our grading scale. This is about a C plus. Okay, so we went ahead and took a look. Now, let's compare why we were putting that. It's a better scale, right? We have a better question that they're asking ourselves, but let's take a bit of a closer look at that. So once again, we're going to start off with C major, right? C Ionian. And here we asked ourselves, what's the difference between C major and C minor? Now, this is a much better question when you're first starting off to learn modes. Again, when you understand them and you've got them down pat, then this is a perfectly valid question. But as you're learning them, right, this is maybe not the best question to be asking yourself because you're really starting to intermingle, different sounds in there. So we're kind of looking at this, but it's kind of in that CB area, right? That we gave it that C plus, but let's talk about why. Well, first off, we maintained our tonic. So that is definitely a good thing, right? We're comparing C major to C minor. That's a good thing. Now, when we look at the scale patterns on the fretboard, you can see how divergent they are, right? Even though we're still starting on C, the difference between the C major or C Ionian and the C minor or C Aeolian, that's still pretty big, right? So we're still comparing this major and minor thing. First learning, this is not a great question to be asking yourself. It's good that you're comparing C major to C minor, but it can get you a little bit confused when you're first starting off learning the modes, right? So we need to kind of take a step back and try to really increase the quality of the questions that we're asking ourselves to learn the mode. And that's what we're going to go ahead and jump into now. All right, so now let's take that and kind of build on starting to really understand better questions for our modes. And here, what we're going to do is compare our C major to one of the other major modes. And in this case, we're going to be looking at Lydian. So let's take a listen. Now, what we need to do is ask ourselves, what's the difference between C major and C Lydian? Now, this we're going to rank on our scale at an A plus for our questions on the mode. Now we're starting on C. We're comparing C major or C Ionian with C Lydian, which is another major mode. And so now the question, when we say what's the difference between C Ionian and C Lydian, now we are starting to understand the modes better. We're staying in the same box, if you will, same shape, and we're comparing a major scale to another major scale, or in this case, a major mode, C Ionian, to another major mode, C Lydian. Okay, so now we took a step back and we had, we definitely looked at modes from a comparison that made a lot more sense, right? So once again, starting off with our C major, C Ionian, we've got this scale and we were asking ourselves, what's the difference between C major and C Lydian? Both of which are major modes, Ionian and Lydian, and that is definitely the right question to be asking yourselves when you're starting to first understand the difference, the variations between these modes, right? So when we're looking at the C Ionian or C major scale, we're starting off on C, that's our tonic, right? And when we're comparing it to another C major, in this case C Lydian scale, we maintain that tonic, and that's definitely good. And in addition to that, when we look at the variations between the C Ionian or C major scale and the C Lydian scale, we've maintained that mode, right? Major to major, that's our comparison. And that's exactly what we want. And we can see that the variations here are pretty minimal. now we can start to hear nuances, right? We can start to hear the little small changes that make a huge difference in our music. But so far, we've looked at the major scales, but in the major modes, but what does that have to do with our minors, right? So let's go ahead and let's look at one example for that really quick, and we'll go ahead and jump into that now. All right, so we were looking at the C major. Now, let's go ahead and look at the C minor and compare it to some of our other modes. In this case, we're talking about Dorian and Lydian. So let's go ahead and start right off, and we'll go ahead and look at the Dorian first by way of comparison to C minor. So we'll start with C minor. And now let's compare that to Dorian. Again, it's a minor mode, only now we're doing C minor, C Aeolian, compared to C Dorian. Right, so we have C Aeolian versus our C Dorian. Okay? All right, so taking a look at our minor modes as well, right? And there was a section in there where I think I said the Lydian was minor, and I misspoke. It's obviously Phrygian, right? Dorian and Phrygian are your minor modes. Just to kind of clarify in case that slipped in. But here, once again, we're looking at our grading scale. But what we're going to do is start off looking at C Aeolian, or C minor, right? That's going to be our base scale that we're going to look at the variations from. And we're going to ask the question, what's the difference between C minor and C Dorian? Well, again, this is a great question to be asking yourself as you're learning the modes, because, right, we've maintained the same tonic, C, that's awesome. And we've also maintained the actual mode, right? So when we're looking at the scale, the difference between C minor and C Dorian is pretty minimal because they're both minor modes. And so this is just a great question to be asking yourself, right? And so keep that in mind, right? And I didn't do the C Lydian and the C Phrygian just simply for time, but it's a great exercise for each one of you to kind of go out and compare the C minor to C Phrygian and the C major to the C Lydian. So, I wanted to get this out there, but you get the idea. And it's a great exercise to just play around with these scales. Now, with that being said, as we're kind of on the conversation about exercises, it's a great exercise for you to do. Create a backing track with nothing more than a C power chord. Don't make it a C minor, don't make it a C major, nothing but a C power chord. And the reason we use the power chord is because there's no third, right? It's the root and the perfect fifth. So it has no major or minor variation to it. And the reason that we put that backing track together is it allows us to just run through the scales, in this case our modes, over and over. And so, for example, if you have a backing track with nothing but a C power chord, right? Don't change it up or anything else, because it'll help your ear out, right? And that's all we're trying to do right now. And you just play the C Ionian, and then the C Lydian, and then the C Lydian. You'll start to hear that sound. You'll hear that variation. And it will really start to train your ear to understand what some of these modes start to sound like. Once you've run this for 5 minutes and you're probably bored, switch it over to the minor modes, right? So now we're looking at C Aeolian, C Dorian, C Phrygian, and just loop them, just run them over and over against this C power chord backing track. and you will hear what modes start to sound like. And I think will do you a lot of good as you're learning the modes to hear them without necessarily trying to put or, compose music. Just run your scales, right? You don't worry about getting fancy. Just run them up and down, right? Just linear, just up and down, and start to just pay attention to that sound. And your ear will get trained to understand these a lot better, and it'll happen pretty quick. So with that being said, I think this will be a great exercise for everyone this week. Let me know down in the comments if you need me to do a video, or if you need me to post just something with a power chord. If you don't know how to do backing tracks, you can find backing tracks all over the place, but a lot of them will change chords, right? They'll do a C major followed by an A minor, or whatever it may be. But just having that droning C power chord, I think, will be very good for you. But anyways, great exercise. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this one out. As always, if you're getting something out of these videos, huge appreciation on the thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, as always, I don't charge anything. YouTube doesn't charge anything. Smash that subscribe. Huge help to the channel. And if you haven't done so already, please participate in that poll. Again, link down in the comments. With all that being said, as always, huge appreciation to everyone who sticks around to these videos. And we will see you next week, where I will start to look at some of the relatives for the modes, right? We talk about relative minors, and we'll jump a little bit more into that. We'll see some more circle of fifths next week as well. All right. So until then, take care, everybody.